Hey, and welcome back to episode 8 of The Housekeeper's Diary by Wendy Berry. And we're up to chapter 9. We're still in 1988, and the title of this chapter is called The Dog and the Duchess. Now, this chapter is about Fergie, and I'm going to bring all my professionalism to bear because, as you probably know, if you've been following this channel, I am not a Fergie fan. I have my reasons. And I will stay professional, and I'll just let Wendy Berry say what she wants to say. Now, I have made an interesting note underneath the title heading on this book, and I have actually said this: Wendy Berry can't stand Fergie, and I have to agree. So that might give you an idea of just how neutral I'm going to be. But I will try to keep my opinions to a minimum. Let's get reading. Now, the opening sentence is rather telling. A heavily pregnant redhead stood puffing out of breath at the front door, her cheeks covered in beads of sweat. "Hiya," boomed Fergie, brushing past Paul and walking into the sitting room. "Is the prince around?" Now, she then goes on to say that her poor lady-in-waiting, Helen Hughes, follows up behind, carting all the bags all by herself. Well, Fergie was pregnant, so she couldn't carry any bags. And she was only about a month off having Beatrice, and she was really enormous, which happens to us all when we have our second babies, because everything gets a little loosey-goosey, doesn't it, after you've had your first one. And so she was very, very, very pregnant. Now, the thing about Fergs is she would turn up at Highgrove too early. So, you know, she was invited, but Prince Charles was always inspected much, much later. But Fergie would sort of barrel her way in unexpectedly early, although the staff would sort of predict that she would do that. And she had a bit of an attitude about her. And I'll share just another little snippet. Unlike her friendship with Diana, which was beginning to cool, bear in mind it's 1988 and the relationship with Diana is beginning to cool. Oh, look, I'll just say it. I can't stand it. Look, from my research and my observations over many, 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 many years, I feel Sarah over-egged the pudding somewhat with her friendship with Diana. It is well documented that, like in this book, it was beginning to cool in 1988 and 1989. And I feel that after Diana's death, Fergie positioned herself, because it was lucrative for her and lucrative for what she was trying to sell, she positioned herself as one of the closest, most bosomy friendships that you could ever have with Dutch. And the reality is that it was well and truly cooled at least 9 years before Diana's death. And so that's just one of the things. I think she's a bit of an opportunist. Now I'll take me out of it again and we'll go back to the book. Unlike her friendship with Diana, which was beginning to cool, Sarah's relationship with Charles seemed to be growing closer by the week. She would ring up and ask his advice on the most trifling of things, ranging from polo matters to which charities she should try to become involved with. So she was all out to impress the future heir to the throne. And look, it's worked. "Get us some tea, will you?" she asked of no one in particular. She had the habit of doing that. It's well documented in many books with staff that she wouldn't actually look at a member of staff like they were an actual person, but would bellow into the wind commands. "Get me some tea, will you?" she'd say to the air, rather than say, "Wendy or Paul, could you get us some tea? We're parched." You know, class, that sort of thing. This isn't going well. Oh well, bear with. Since her marriage to Andrew, Sarah Ferguson had changed no end. From a rather frumpy Sloane, now this isn't me talking, this is Wendy Berry talking, into a very demanding young madam. "That woman," said Paul through gritted teeth. as we narrowly missed kicking Bendix, Sarah's dog. Now, Sarah's dog was adorable. It was a little terrier. And, yes, so that was uncalled for. You can't blame the faults of the mistress on the poor little dog, Paul. So he went through to the kitchen to prepare the tea tray. When Charles arrived, he rushed through to greet them, showing a genuine warmth and humour rarely bestowed on his wife. "Charles!" shrieked Sarah as he walked through the door. "How brilliant to see you!" Well, it would have been absolutely brill. And Diana was off safely doing something else for a couple of days, so she wasn't going to turn up that weekend. Now, one thing I have to say is that, you know how I keep saying that Wendy Berry is really balanced in that she'll have a go at Diana, then she'll have a go at Charles. I think I have been remiss in sort of reading out those little bits, like that little bit where she said, warmth and humour rarely bestowed on his wife. See, I've left them out on occasion, not all the time, but I think they do change the sort of the tenor of the conversation. They do change how the book comes across. And that's where people have actually got the book and reading it, they would sort of go, I think they would be getting a different impression. And it's hard to give you an accurate impression because I'm only reading really the juicy, interesting bits. But there's little throwaway phrases like that sort of maybe tell the tale. So I was very careful to put that one in. Sorry if you heard a revvy car then. I can't help that. Okay, now there's another funny thing. So they have dinner that night and Sarah's very good entertainment when you invite her over for dinner, as Piers Morgan would attest with her monthly dinners with him when he was editor of the Mirror. Great company. Now, I assume that she wasn't actually drinking because she was pregnant. So she manages to be raucous even when she's not having a wine. That's a mark of a truly entertaining person. So they had a great night, and the next morning Wendy Berry's due to take up an early morning tray to the Duchess's bedroom. And as she walked along the landing, she heard something quite peculiar. She heard the sound of barking and giggling from the room, and she gently tapped on the door when going to enter with the early morning tray, and this is the sight that befell her. Lying on her back like a beached whale, and sorry. And with her nightdress up around her breasts, the Duchess of York was balancing Bendix on her massively swollen belly. Well, Wendy, she's pregnant. You can't have a go at someone for having a massively swollen belly when they're pregnant. So I don't approve of that. I think she's having a bit of a go, a bit too much of a go. With only a month to go before the birth, Fergie's tummy was huge. It was an impossible mountain for Bendix to climb. So this is what she saw. As I walked in, she was balancing the dog on top of her naked belly, right? It's very earthy, Fergie, very earthy. Roaring with laughter, and the terrier was yapping and barking as she pulled at its legs to keep it in position. The poor dog. You know what? I reckon the dog probably felt like it was climbing Mount Everest at that point. Anyway, she's balancing this poor terrified yapping terrier on top of her mountainous pregnant belly. I wonder whether Beatrice has a particular affinity with dogs, particularly terriers. I'm sure she must remember the experience somewhere in her subconscious. Now, understandably, poor old Fergs was a bit embarrassed because she didn't expect Wendy Berry to walk in at that time. So she blushed violently. She threw the dog off her. She didn't hurt the dog. And she pulled the sheet up because, you know, she was covering herself after her wonderful little game. And she told Wendy Berry to put the tray over there, will you? And then Wendy Berry said to her kindly, she didn't have to, is there anything you'd like me to press for you to wear today? And Ferg says, oh, no, I shouldn't think so. And then she said, oh, actually, no, press the whole lot, will you? 2 huge suitcases full of clothes. She's going home later that day and she expects Wendy Berry to iron the bloody lot. Anyway, Wendy Berry is absolutely spewing. She does not want to do it, and you can tell she doesn't want to do it. I stared in horror at the 2 bags filled with blouses and maternity clothes. All of it, ma'am? I responded, because it's unreasonable. She doesn't live there. If she wanted the whole 2 bags ironed, she should go home and get her usual staff to do it. But if you're just a guest for a night, asking the staff to iron 1 outfit for you to wear the next day, or even 2 outfits if you're, inconsiderate, even 3, but 2 whole bags full of outfits, no, you don't get to do that. Yes, she said firmly, all of it. And she says, Fergie, by now dressed in an exquisitely ironed maternity suit, spoke quietly and confidently with the press as she was about to get in the car. Then with a kiss to Charles and a very curt bye over her shoulder, not even looking at them, to Paul and me, she waddled to the car and drove off. Oh, Wendy Berry hates her. She just hates her. And I'm here for it. I am here for it. Trust me. So the next day, Diana arrived with no nanny, no dresser, and Charles had already gone to bed. And then the next morning, he got up really early and went off to polo. Diana surfaced at breakfast. Charles didn't come home all day until late the next night. And then by midday Sunday, Diana went back to London in tears, her face hidden by a baseball cap brim. Dashing out through the back door, she was so upset she couldn't even say goodbye. Now, evidently there was lots of phone calls going back and forth to London as well, and Diana looking really distraught and really upset. And Wendy Berry hints, but she doesn't actually say, but she hints it could be to do with certain phone conversations being made public, or the threat of certain phone conversations being made public. Because I know in the squidgy tapes, Diana was very, very concerned about it, but then they didn't surface until a lot later. So maybe that was happening at the time. She doesn't really spell it out. And then Wendy Berry says this. Now, isn't it sad that with the huge Sarah from Charles, that maybe if there had been a bit more of that when Diana arrived, and vice versa, without Diana being in tears and distraught and being awful all the time, if there had been a bit more kindness to each other, maybe things would have been a bit better. I don't know. Oh, just seems unfair, doesn't it? And Wendy Berry says the constant mood swings which took Diana from delirious happiness to despair was turning into an irritating and confusing pattern for all the staff. Then, complete switcheroo, Charles and Diana celebrate their 7th wedding anniversary a few weekends later. They both arrive at Highgrove like lovebirds. Can you work this out? It's just so Jekyll and Hyde, so up and down from both of them. So she describes it like this. Charles and Diana arrived for their 7th wedding anniversary at Highgrove looking as happy as newlyweds. Now, Wendy Berry had filled all the rooms with beautiful cut flowers, and both the prince and princess seemed overwhelmed by their scents and colours. How romantic Charles looks, said Diana, as she pointed to an enormous bunch of wild roses on the piano in the hall. And then it's a weekend of domestic bliss. The boys are happy. They're happy. Charles and Diana chase each other around the pool and wrestle with each other and fall into the pool and are affectionate, and the boys have a ball, and it's just lovely. And the boys are there for a whole week. And, they're in their shorts, swimming, riding, firing their water pistols at anyone within range. They're excited about an upcoming vacation in Spain. And eventually, after that beautiful week, they do go off to Scotland, then later to Majorca. And Wendy and Paul set about giving Highgrove its annual clean. Now, Charles used to come back sort of unannounced during the annual clean and stay for a night to check on the progress of the work. So the staff were never allowed to just have too much of a free rein. But he used to be very kind, and he used to delight in even the most minor alterations, Wendy Berry says, and subtle changes of paint. Now, new mobile telephones were delivered and they were told that they had to be very careful. Speech on mobile phones is not just insecure, it is very easy to intercept. And this is when she says, of course, none of us quite knew how easy until tapes of the princes and princesses' intimate conversations were published in the newspapers. So she's sort of, that hadn't happened yet. But evidently stuff was going down because there was, like I said, all these new phones given out to the staff with strict instructions. Now, there were many visitors in the autumn to Highgrove. There was Frances Shan Kidd, which, as you know, is Diana's mother. There was Sarah Lindsay, which, as you know, Hugh Lindsay died in that awful avalanche, with her baby Alice, and also Princess Beatrice with her nanny, not with Andrew and with Sarah, but just with the nanny. And evidently, Diana just delighted in Beatrice. She spent a lot of time in the nursery. She was wonderful with her and she just snuggled into her and ate her all up and she just loved her. And she fussed over little Alice too, Wendy Berry says. Wendy Berry is really convinced that Diana would have just loved another baby. She just, really implies it a lot. There was an unspoken bond between Diana and Mrs. Lindsay following the avalanche that Charles or Diana or both would always look after her. So that's a lovely thing. She says that Sarah Lindsay herself was remarkably calm and composed, and she took solace in the fact that Hugh's baby was alive and well, even if Hugh could not be there himself. That's sad, isn't it? Now, Bruno Sprecher, the friend of Fergie's who was acting as ski guide that day, also spent an October weekend with Charles and Diana. Wendy Berry said that was a little tense and awkward. She's a great friend of Sarah's, but yes, he was a little tense. Charles and Diana invited him because they wanted to make sure that he didn't blame himself for the accident. Fergie's nanny, Alison Wardley, turned up in a miniskirt, was much younger than I expected and was extremely open and friendly with staff. But she was very circumspect about Fergie and Andrew and any personal stories. She was very good. She didn't let any cats out of the bag. But she did say that Fergie could be really quite difficult. And then she added, like anyone. So Wendy Berry says that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know what also gets my goat? People saying that Fergie has never betrayed the royal family. She did nothing but talk about the royal family to journalists after she broke up with Andrew. All those boozy lunches. She was like a known alleged source. And I'm sure she only said lovely things. But when the press started to turn on Diana and started to say about how difficult she was, where do you think that came from? Just saying. Okay, now this is to even the balance. Charles was still visiting Camilla. Okay, so Charles is still doing his own thing. Okay. Although by this stage, she did not come so frequently to Highgrove. Now, this is where I'm a little bit mystified because we're up to chapter 9 and Wendy Berry has not referred to Camilla coming to Highgrove. And then she does this one sentence saying, not coming so frequently to Highgrove. So, yes, I agree now with people admonishing me in the comments saying that, oh, well, Camilla was going to Highgrove every time Diana wasn't there. Well, it turns out that, yes, indeed, you were probably right. It's just that Wendy Berry wasn't really mentioning it. So I stand corrected. I stand corrected. We can't get too much at each other with everything Wendy Berry says, though. We've got to remain friends. I'm just the messenger. We're just relaying. Okay, so Diana was spending a lot of time with her friend James Hewitt, but tempers and emotions had cooled enough in their marriage to allow a balance and consequently a calmer atmosphere at home. Under episode 7, someone commented and they said, do you seriously think that Diana's relationship with James Hewitt wasn't sanctioned by MI5 and MI6 and the Queen and Prince Charles and everyone it had to be sanctioned by? He was in the military. And they said that he would have been thrown out for an affair with the Princess of Wales if it wasn't allowed, if it wasn't sanctioned. So they say that that's a big indication that there was a clear agreement between Charles and Diana. You have your lover, I'll have mine, we'll be civil to each other, and we'll allow each other to have happiness. So it got a little bit distorted around the time of the Panorama interview because Diana, by then out on her own as a divorced woman, separated woman, sorry. She got divorced after the Panorama interview. The story was changed a little bit where she was sort of the person being cheated on, whereas really by this stage, by 88, it was really pretty much and agreed. Both of them were cheating on each other and both of them knew about it, and it seems like really an arrangement. Now, this is an interesting little final tidbit about the staff Christmas ball at the end of that year, at the end of 88. The main Christmas staff ball that year was at Buckingham Palace, and I'd arranged for my old friend to come with me. So as the orchestra struck up, Prince Philip approached a lady, a member of staff, and asked for a dance. And Fergie was there with Prince Andrew, and I noticed she was coming in our direction, a broad grin on her face. As she bounced up to us, I began to introduce my guest. A look of confusion furrowed her brow. "Well, who on earth are you?" she barked, somewhat officiously. I explained I'd looked after her many times at Highgrove. She didn't say many times. She said I'd looked after her at Highgrove, but she'd looked after her many times. I'm saying that for her. "Oh, yes," she replied aloofly, "so you did." And she walked away. Now, she was obviously bouncing up to ask the man that Wendy Berry was with for a dance, but she couldn't handle the fact that Wendy Berry was the housekeeper and tried to introduce her. I was not so angry so much for myself as for my guest. "Are they always this rude?" he asked me. "Your life must be made a misery." "Well, no. Gentlemen guests to Wendy Berry, they are all not so rude. The late Queen was lovely. Diana knew how to behave at the staff ball. She was always lovely and never embarrassed any of the staff and always made a fuss of all the staff's families and friends and made them feel good. Prince Charles wasn't rude at the staff ball or anything like that. Prince Philip even straight away asked a staff member to dance. No, generally, they were all really lovely. But there were some pompous, puffed up little people that took it upon themselves to be superior. And apparently, Fergie was one of them. I'll be back with a more neutral chapter. Let's have a look what the title is on the next chapter after the dog and the Duchess. 1989, we're up to staff confidences. And it is a juicy chapter, chapter 10. Join me next Saturday for chapter 10. We're about halfway through the book and it's very, very juicy. And do please forgive me if I showed my dislike of Fergie too much. But look, we're friends. I've got to be honest. I don't expect you to agree with me. You can have your own view and I totally 100% respect it. But when it comes to Fergie, we've just got to agree to disagree, okay? Okay? I'll see you again very soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye.